The White House press briefing room was packed, buzzing with the usual anticipation and simmering tensions that had become the norm under President Donald Trump's second term. Reporters from every major media outlet were seated in their designated spots, notebooks open, cameras rolling, and the air thick with the weight of the political battlefield. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, the young, sharp-witted, and unwaveringly loyal White House press secretary. Since taking the role, she had gained a reputation for being both fiercely articulate and unapologetically combative in defending the administration's stances. With her striking confidence, she had become a lightning rod for controversy, particularly among the left-leaning press. Seated in the front row right in the line of fire was Veronica Sinclair, a liberal reporter from the highly influential national news network CNN. Veronica was notorious for her aggressive questioning, sharp tongue, and open disdain for the Trump administration. She had made it her mission to hold the White House accountable in ways that often felt more like personal attacks than journalistic inquiries. As Karoline stepped up to the podium, dressed in a sleek navy blue blazer and exuding an air of quiet authority, Veronica's lips curled into a smirk. She was ready to strike. The moment Karoline greeted the room, Veronica raised her hand with an exaggerated wave, signaling she had the first question. Knowing she wouldn't be ignored, Karoline sighed slightly and nodded toward her. "Ah, Ms. Sinclair. I see you're eager to start us off. Go ahead." Veronica wasted no time. She adjusted her glasses, leaned forward slightly, and delivered her question with venom-laced sarcasm. "Karoline, let's cut to the chase. Given that you repeat every single word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth without an ounce of critical thought, would it be fair to say that your real job title should be Trump's lapdog rather than White House press secretary?" A murmur rippled through the room. Some reporters exchanged glances, others stifled smirks, and the sound of fingers furiously typing on keyboards filled the air. Cameras zoomed in on Karoline's face, anticipating a reaction, anger, frustration, maybe even an attempt to deflect. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, a cool smile forming at the edges of her lips. She let the silence hang for a beat, allowing the weight of the insult to settle before responding. "Veronica, it's fascinating how you, a so-called journalist, are more interested in crafting cheap insults than in asking substantive questions that matter to the American people. But since you're clearly more interested in theatrics than facts, allow me to educate you." She placed both hands on the podium, her voice steady but cutting. "First, if defending policies that prioritize the safety, economy, and prosperity of American citizens makes me a lapdog, then I wear that title with pride, because unlike some in this room, I believe in serving my country, not an ideological agenda." The room went still. Even some of Veronica's colleagues looked up from their notes, surprised by the sheer poise of Karoline's retort. But she wasn't finished. "Second, let's talk about actual journalism for a second. Your network, and many like it, spent the last decade masquerading as objective news while pushing outright propaganda. If there's anyone guilty of being a lapdog, it's the so-called journalists who regurgitate talking points handed to them by political operatives." A low murmur spread among the press corps. Even seasoned White House correspondents were taken aback by the sheer force of Karoline's words. Veronica, however, wasn't about to back down. She scoffed, shaking her head. "So you're saying that dissent is propaganda? You can't seriously expect Americans to buy that." Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly. "Dissent is healthy, but when it's based on misinformation, cherry-picked narratives, and outright hostility rather than a genuine pursuit of truth, then yes, it's propaganda." Her voice remained calm, unwavering. "And let's not pretend this is about journalistic integrity, Veronica. You weren't looking for an answer, you were looking for a headline. You wanted a soundbite that fits your network's narrative. Well, here's one for you." She leaned in just a little, her eyes locked onto Veronica's. "The real story here isn't whether I'm a lapdog for Trump. It's that mainstream media, yours included, has spent years treating objective truth like an inconvenience rather than a responsibility. And the American people, they see right through it." For the first time in years, Veronica Sinclair had no immediate comeback. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy. It was deafening. The press room was frozen in time. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. No frantic scribbling of notes, no hushed whispers. Just an air of shock and intrigue hanging over the room like a storm cloud. Karoline Leavitt, the so-called Trump lapdog, had not only refused to cower under Veronica Sinclair's mockery, but had turned the tables so decisively that even the most seasoned journalists struggled to process it. Veronica, clearly taken aback, finally forced a chuckle. It was the kind of laugh that masked frustration, the kind that said, "This isn't over." She flicked a glance at the cameras before composing herself, but Karoline had already moved on. "Next question." Karoline's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a knife. The other reporters hesitated. They had just witnessed an unprecedented moment, one that would dominate the news cycle for days. No one wanted to be the next to challenge Karoline, at least not immediately. A journalist from a conservative outlet finally raised his hand, and Karoline turned her attention to him, seamlessly continuing the briefing as if nothing had happened. But behind the scenes, the damage was done, just not in the way Veronica had intended. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Clips of Karoline's response flooded social media. Within half an hour, hashtags like #CarolineClapsBack, #LapdogLies, and #VeronicaOwned were trending on X, formerly Twitter. Memes surfaced almost instantly with side-by-side images of Karoline standing firm and Veronica looking stunned. Conservative commentators praised Karoline's poise and fire. Finally, a press secretary with a spine, Karoline Leavitt just exposed the media's hypocrisy in real time. Tucker Vance's National Patriot Network. Veronica thought she was going to humiliate Karoline. Instead, she got an education. Laura Callahan, American First News. Meanwhile, liberal circles went into full damage control. We are witnessing the most dangerous normalization of authoritarianism. Karoline Leavitt is a dangerous mouthpiece for an anti-democratic regime. Jonah Bryce, Progressive Nation. This is a chilling reminder of how far Trump's people will go to demonize the press. Deborah Reeves, CNN. CNN itself scrambled to shape the narrative, releasing a statement just hours later. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's remarks today were an attempt to discredit the integrity of a free press. Veronica Sinclair remains committed to holding this administration accountable despite its blatant hostility toward the truth. But the damage was done. The American public wasn't buying the spin. The viral moment had exposed a fundamental truth: whether people loved or hated Trump, they were increasingly skeptical of the media's role in shaping the national conversation. Later that evening, Karoline sat in her office, staring at her phone as message after message poured in. Some were from allies, congratulating her on standing her ground. Others were from critics, calling her everything from a fascist enabler to Trump's Barbie. A sharp knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door swung open and in walked Stephen Reynolds, the White House Chief of Staff. A no-nonsense man in his late 50s, Reynolds was one of Trump's most trusted advisors, a battle-hardened strategist who had seen it all. "Hell of a show today," he said, tossing a newspaper onto her desk. The headline read, "Trump Press Secretary versus Media, Who Really Controls the Narrative?" Karoline smirked. "Is that a compliment, sir?" Reynolds chuckled, sinking into the chair across from her. "Depends. Do you have any idea how much chaos you just caused?" She shrugged. "If by chaos you mean exposing the double standard in the media, then yeah. Guilty as charged." Reynolds leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Look, I'm not saying you were wrong. In fact, I'd say it's about damn time someone put Sinclair in her place. But you've just painted a massive target on your back. They're not going to let this go." Karoline nodded, fully aware of what was coming. "Let them try." Reynolds studied her for a moment before nodding approvingly. "Good, because the president saw the clip. That got her attention. And," Reynolds grinned, "he's calling you to the Oval first thing tomorrow." Karoline's heart skipped a beat. Being summoned to the Oval Office directly by Trump himself? That wasn't something that happened every day. She exhaled slowly. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be big. Meanwhile, in a sleek, glass-walled conference room at NNN headquarters, Veronica Sinclair sat with her editor-in-chief, Douglas Farrington, and a handful of senior producers. Farrington, an older man with silver hair and a permanent scowl, tossed his reading glasses onto the table. "This is a disaster," one of the producers piped up. "Actually, sir, engagement numbers are through the roof. Even conservative outlets are running with it." Farrington scowled. "That's the problem. We lost control of the narrative. We're supposed to be defining the headlines, not becoming them." He turned to Veronica. You need to hit back hard. Veronica, still seething from the humiliation, nodded. Oh, don't worry. I plan to. A wicked smile crossed her lips as she leaned forward. If Karoline wants to play this game, let's see how she handles the next round. The next morning, Karoline Leavitt strode confidently through the White House corridors, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The weight of the previous day's confrontation still lingered, but she wasn't intimidated. If anything, she was energized. As she reached the entrance to the Oval Office, a Marine standing guard gave her a crisp nod before opening the door. Inside, President Donald Trump sat behind the resolute desk, reviewing a document. His signature red tie was slightly loosened, and his expression, though serious, bore a hint of amusement. Across from him stood Stephen Reynolds, who gestured for Karoline to step forward. Trump glanced up and grinned. Ah, Karoline, come on in, have a seat. She did as instructed, folding her hands in her lap as the president leaned back in his chair. I gotta tell ya, Trump said, shaking his head. Yesterday's press briefing? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. They came after you with everything, and you smacked them down like a champion. The people loved it. Karoline smiled. Just doing my job, sir. Trump chuckled. Your job? No. That wasn't just a press briefing. That was a takedown. Sinclair thought she could embarrass you. And you turned it around so fast, she didn't even know what hit her. He gestured toward Reynolds. Steve, what's the response looking like? Reynolds handed Trump a folder. Polling from conservative and independent voters is overwhelmingly positive. Social media engagement is off the charts. The media is in full meltdown mode trying to recover from it. Trump flipped through the papers before nodding approvingly. Good. We need that. The media thinks they run the show. They think they can mock us, humiliate us, and get away with it. But you, he pointed at Karoline, you just reminded them that they don't dictate the narrative anymore. Karoline leaned forward slightly. With all due respect, Mr. President, I didn't do it for the applause. I did it because I'm tired of the media twisting the truth. Americans deserve honesty, and they're not getting it from people like Veronica Sinclair. Trump's grin widened. And that's why you're perfect for this job. Reynolds cleared his throat. Sir, there's something else we need to discuss. Sinclair and her network aren't going to let this slide. In fact, I bet my last dollar they're planning an attack right now. Trump waved a dismissive hand. Let them try. They're desperate. That's why they went after Karoline in the first place. He turned back to her. Are you ready for that? Karoline met his gaze without hesitation. More than ready. Trump smirked. That's what I like to hear. Meanwhile, in the newsroom of National News Network NNN, Veronica Sinclair sat in a private conference room reviewing a stack of papers with her editor, Douglas Farrington. We need to discredit her, Farrington said bluntly. She's become a symbol of Trump's war against the press, and if we don't knock her down a few pegs, it's going to embolden more people like her. Veronica nodded. I already have a plan. She pulled out her laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was a dossier of Karoline's past, college affiliations, past statements, even old tweets. Nothing scandalous, but enough to paint a picture, she said. We highlight her connections to far-right circles, spin her as a propagandist, and most importantly, she clicked on a particular email. We dig into her financial records. If there's even a whiff of controversy, we blow it up. Farrington smirked. I like it. But let's go further. Get people talking about her personal life. Make her the story, not just her words. Veronica's eyes gleamed. Consider it done. Within hours, headlines began flooding left-leaning news outlets. Who is Karoline Leavitt? The radical voice behind Trump's press room, NNN. Trump's press secretary tied to fringe right-wing groups, the Daily Patriot. The dangerous rise of Karoline Leavitt, a mouthpiece for authoritarianism, progressive nation. Cable news panels were filled with analysts dissecting Karoline's past. They questioned her affiliations, her loyalty to Trump, even her college essays on constitutional law. On CNN, a panelist remarked, she's young, ambitious, and a true believer. And that makes her dangerous. On MSNBC, another pundit declared, this isn't just about one press secretary. This is about an administration that is systematically dismantling the free press. Veronica Sinclair herself appeared on NNN's primetime show, feigning concern. I have nothing personal against Karoline, she said with a dramatic sigh. But I do worry about what her presence represents. A world where journalists are attacked simply for asking tough questions. The message was clear. They wanted to destroy her. But Karoline? She was ready for the fight. Karoline Leavitt sat in her White House office, scrolling through the relentless wave of headlines attacking her character. They weren't just questioning her policies. They were going after her past, her integrity, and even her personal life. She expected pushback, but this was war. Her phone buzzed. A message from her close friend and conservative commentator, Ethan Callaway. They're scared. That means you did something right. You ready to fire back? She smirked. More than ready. Just as she was about to call her press team, the intercom buzzed. Ms. Leavitt, there's a call for you. Veronica Sinclair, from NNN. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Now this is interesting. Put her through, she said, leaning back in her chair. A second later, Veronica's voice came through the speaker, dripping with faux professionalism. Karoline, I thought I'd extend an opportunity for you to respond to the recent reports about your background. We're airing a segment tonight, and I'd be happy to give you a fair chance to clarify some of the concerns raised. Karoline smirked. Concerns? That was rich coming from the same woman who started the smear campaign. Veronica, let me get this straight. Your network spent the past 24 hours slandering me, twisting my record, and questioning my character. And now you want me to come on your show so you can pretend to be objective. A pause. Then a slight chuckle from Veronica. I'm giving you a platform, Karoline. If you refuse, that's on you. Karoline didn't hesitate. Oh, I'll come on your show, Veronica. But make sure your producers have plenty of time, because I'm bringing receipts. That evening, America tuned in as Karoline Leavitt and Veronica Sinclair faced off in a live primetime interview. NNN promoted it as a fair and balanced discussion. But the audience knew better. This was a showdown. The cameras went live. Veronica, poised as ever, welcomed viewers. Tonight, we're joined by White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, who is here to respond to the recent reports about her past affiliations and controversial ties. Karoline, thank you for being here. Karoline, composed and confident, nodded. Glad to be here. Veronica wasted no time. Let's start with the allegations. There are reports that, in college, you associated with individuals from far-right political circles. How do you respond to critics who say this proves your bias as press secretary? Karoline chuckled. Oh, so now college friendships determine someone's credibility? That's interesting considering your network defended a Supreme Court nominee accused of assault with zero evidence, but when it comes to me, suddenly speculation is fact. Veronica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Karoline continued. But let's be clear, the real reason I'm here isn't because of my past. It's because I embarrassed you at the press briefing. You lost control of the narrative and now you're desperate to take me down. Veronica's eyes narrowed. That's an absurd accusation. Karoline tilted her head. Is it? Because I have a list of over 20 misleading stories your network has run about this administration, many of which you personally pushed. She pulled out a stack of papers. Veronica's face stiffened. Karoline held up a highlighted page. Here's one. Asterisk, Trump colluded with Russia, debunked. Then we have asterisk, Border Patrol whipping migrants, proven false. And my personal favorite, the Trump campaign spied on Biden when, in reality, it was the other way around. The audience watching at home saw the shift in Veronica's expression. She was losing. But Karoline wasn't done. You see, Veronica, this isn't about journalism. It's about control. You and your colleagues don't ask questions, you push narratives. And when someone dares to challenge you, you go for character assassination instead of debate. Veronica's composure cracked. So you're saying the media is the enemy of the people? Karoline's response was sharp. No. I'm saying bad journalism is the enemy of the people. And you've been proving my point all week. The show ended with Veronica looking rattled and Karoline walking away victorious. The moment the interview ended, the internet exploded. Clips of Karoline's takedown of Veronica Sinclair spread like wildfire. Conservative outlets hailed it as a masterclass in exposing media hypocrisy, while even some moderate commentators admitted that Sinclair had been caught off guard. Karoline Leavitt just destroyed NNN's credibility in real time. This wasn't an interview, it was a reckoning. Tucker Vance, National Patriot Network. Sinclair thought she was going to humiliate Karoline. Instead, she got fact-checked on live TV. Poetic justice. Ethan Callaway, American First News. On the other side, liberal media went into damage control mode. Karoline Leavitt uses Trump playbook to attack journalists, Progressive Nation. Dangerous rhetoric, Karoline Leavitt's assault on press freedom, MSNBC. But no matter how they spun it, the public had already made up its mind. Polls conducted the next morning showed Karoline's favorability skyrocketing, particularly among independent voters who were increasingly skeptical of the mainstream media. In the White House, the mood was celebratory. Karoline sat in the Roosevelt Room with Stephen Reynolds and other senior aides reviewing the latest numbers. "You did more damage to NNN's credibility in one night than we could have done in a year," Reynolds said, shaking his head in amazement. "Even some liberals are admitting they overplayed their hand." Karoline smirked. "All I did was tell the truth. They did the rest to themselves." A moment later, her phone buzzed. A direct message from President Trump himself. "Terrific job. That was one of the best smackdowns I've ever seen. The media will never recover from this one. Keep up the fight." She exhaled, allowing herself to take in the moment. She had walked into the fire. They had thrown everything they had at her. And yet, she had emerged stronger than ever. Meanwhile, in the offices of National News Network, NNN, the atmosphere was grim. Veronica Sinclair sat in her office, humiliated, seething, as she scrolled through the fallout. Her boss, Douglas Farrington, stormed in, throwing a copy of the morning's headlines onto her desk. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snapped. "We're the laughingstock of the industry. You let a Trump press secretary make you look like an amateur on national television." Veronica's face burned with anger. "She got lucky? We should have pushed harder." No, Farrington cut her off. "We pushed too hard and it backfired. Now people don't trust us." Veronica's heart sank. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to lay low for a while," Farrington said, his voice final. "We'll have another anchor take over your time slot." Veronica felt the blood drain from her face. She had gone from one of the most influential reporters in America to being sidelined, all because she had underestimated Karoline Leavitt. And the worst part? The damage was permanent. Karoline's fiery defensive truth had reshaped the political media landscape. She wasn't just a press secretary anymore, she had become a symbol of resilience against media bias. America had watched as she stood her ground, called out hypocrisy, and refused to back down. And from that moment on, no reporter, liberal or conservative, would dare to mock her again. Because Karoline Leavitt had proven, once and for all, that she was nobody's lapdog. She was a fighter. And the American people loved her for it.